In the summer of 2010, the Miami Heat acquired both Chris Bosh and LeBron James. And with the two stars joining forces with Dwyane Wade, Miami had a super team. The culmination of that level of talent resulted in 4 finals appearances, 2 championships, and easily the greatest 4-year stretch in franchise history. But just as fast as Miami rose, the fall was fairly immediate. Within 2 years' time, not only did Miami lose LeBron, but also lost D Wade and Chris Bosh, thus forcing the franchise to hit the restart button. Now fast forward to today, and not only has Miami quickly pieced together another title contending team, surprising many people in the NBA community, but also they have done it in an unconventional way while keeping their options open in the near future. In a league where franchises have convinced their fan bases that tanking is the only way to better days, the Miami Heat have rebuilt their roster without relying on any top 10 pick ever since they've traded Justice Winslow earlier this year. And what's even more impressive is that some of the young players on this roster were undrafted prospects. So how is it possible? It all began in the summer of 2014. And like I stated in the intro, LeBron James decided to depart from the organization and take his talents back to Cleveland. In an attempt to replace the superstar, Miami decided to sign a bunch of forwards, players such as Josh McRoberts and Danny Granger, but the addition that stood out the most was Luol Deng. Deng was a 6'9" defensive-oriented forward who could give you around 15 to 17 points on the offensive end. Now, of course, that wasn't going to completely replace LeBron James' productivity, but being optimistic, Miami assumed that the productivity from Dwyane Wade and Chris Bosh would increase in LeBron's absence. And fairly early on in the season, it was clear that that was wishful thinking, because by the end of November, Miami was barely above 500, and one of the biggest trademarks to almost every Miami team, the defensive end, had slipped significantly. To address this problem, the Miami Heat decided to take a swing on a young big man who could give them some presence on the board as well as some interior defense. That young big man was Hassan Whiteside. Whiteside was actually drafted back in the 2010 draft by the Sacramento Kings, but unfortunately fell out of favor with that organization and attempted with the Memphis Grizzlies to also find himself back playing for an NBA team. Luckily for Miami though, he actually worked out extremely well for this franchise and immediately became an impact player coming off the bench for a Heat team that desperately needed his productivity, as Whiteside in a handful of minutes was already a double-double player and averaged roughly 2.5 blocks a game. But unfortunately, that still wasn't enough. Miami continued to struggle throughout the regular season, and it became even more evident that on the offensive end, D Wade was past his prime and declining fairly sharply, and needed some help in the backcourt to do a little bit more shot creation for the rest of the team. So Miami hit the trade market, and during the 2015 trading deadline, the Heat decided to trade Danny Granger, Norris Cole, 2 first-round picks, as well as a couple of other players, and in return they received a disgruntled guard out in Phoenix and Goran Dragic. Dragic at the time had a very up-and-down career, but proved in the past 2 seasons that he was more than capable of being a solid contributor to any playoff team, even if that meant sharing the ball handling responsibility with another guard in the backcourt, which seemed to be the perfect fit for Miami. And moving forward, it was very easy to be optimistic about what this Miami Heat team could do for the remainder of the season. But unfortunately, just 2 days later, Chris Bosh was diagnosed with blood clots, which would sideline him for the remainder of the season. And due to his absence, Miami just honestly was never able to gain any footing throughout the rest of the year and finished with a record of 37-45. Because of the losing season, Miami received a top 10 pick in the 2015 draft, and with it, Miami decided to select Justice Winslow, who was a 6'6" wingman and at the time was on many teams' radars thanks to his potential versatility on both ends of the floor. And with their second round pick, the Miami Heat selected Josh Richardson, a 6'5" shooting guard who was believed to be a great complementary piece to any point guard in the backcourt, as he was projected to be a 3-and-D player. For the rest of the offseason, Miami decided to add a couple of more veteran pieces, as well as having the ability to bring back Goran Dragic, who was actually on an expiring contract when he made the transition to Miami, as well as bring back D Wade for just one more season. But more importantly, Chris Bosh was cleared to play basketball at the top of the season, which not only gave Miami back their very impressive starting 5, but also gave them the bench that would have been one of the best in the league. And even with some struggles early on in the upcoming regular season, Miami still finished with a record of 27-21 by the end of January. Leading the charge was both Wade and Bosh, as both of them were averaging roughly around 19 to 20 points on any given night. Furthermore, Goran Dragic proved that he was a great addition to the team and gave the Miami Heat's offense a level of depth that a lot of teams, quite honestly, just had a hard time defending. And manning the paint was Hassan Whiteside. So you could easily say that Miami was on the right path, and it was very impressive to see how this team bounced back so quickly after losing someone of LeBron's caliber. But unfortunately, everything just crumbled right before their eyes. On February 9th, Chris Bosh was yet again diagnosed with blood clots, but this time it was a bit more severe, to the point where, again, he was sidelined for the remainder of the season, but also this diagnosis would eventually lead to him being forced to enter retirement. With the absence of Bosh, Miami tried their hardest to make an audible for the remainder of the season. They slid Luol Deng to the power forward spot, signed Joe Johnson, and ended the season fairly strong, making the playoffs as a third seed with a record of 48 wins, and was even able to advance past the first round after being pushed to 7 games by the Charlotte Hornets, but unfortunately fell short in the second round after giving great effort in pushing the Toronto Raptors to 7 games. And just when you think it can't get worse, oh, it does. Now fast forward to the 2016 offseason, and during the preliminary stages of free agency, it was clear that the face of the franchise in Dwayne Wade and the front office in Miami just weren't on the same page on how the stars should be financially compensated. Unfortunately, they never came to an agreement, and on July 15th, 2016, D. Wade did the unthinkable and signed with the Chicago Bulls. For the rest of the offseason, Miami tried their hardest to replace the productivity of D. Wade, as well as preparing for the worst when it comes to Chris Bosh, and signed both guards and forwards, but unfortunately, none of the acquisitions were enough, and it was clear by the end of December that this year was going to be a rebuilding season, as the Miami Heat had a record of 10-24. And unfortunately, it continues to get worse, as Justice Winslow was ruled out for the remainder of the season, as he had to have a surgery on his shoulder in the early stages of January. The Heat closed out the season strong, but it just wasn't enough, as Miami finished the 2016-2017 regular season with a record of 41-41, which many people believe was the worst outcome imaginable, as Miami finished with a record that wasn't good enough to make the playoffs, but too good to receive a top 3 pick. But it is Miami, one of the best well-ran organizations in the entire league. So even with a 14th overall pick, this franchise is still very dangerous, and they added to the reputation on draft night, because with the 14th overall selection, the Miami Heat drafted Bam Adebayo, a 6'9" big man out of Kentucky that many people overlooked, largely due to his lack of size and offensive skill. But Miami saw a young dog, a player who would fit well with the organization's culture and had the ability to mold himself into someone that could be an adequate fit for the team. But it wasn't going to be immediate, which was going to be very problematic for Miami. See, heading into the 2017-2018 season, the Heat were in possibly the worst situation imaginable. Miami was too good to just tank, but not good enough to truly compete in the playoffs. A huge reason for this was the oddly constructed roster that the front office had on their hands. Part of the team were a bunch of veterans that originally were brought to Miami to help complement stars that no longer were there, and to make matters worse, some of those veterans were on hefty contracts. And the rest of the team were a bunch of young players who had not been in the league long enough to thoroughly understand their true potential. And oh yeah, I don't want to forget this. Miami did not have their first round pick in the upcoming draft because they gave that away during the Goran Dragic trade. So with the blend of talent and lack of tradable assets, regardless of how great of a coach Erik Spoelstra was, this team had a identifiable ceiling. 40-some wins and a first-round exit. And throughout the first few months of the season, that's exactly the pace Miami was on. Now, of course, it didn't help that Hassan Whiteside had missed some games and Dion Waiters was going to be sidelined indefinitely after dealing with an ankle injury. And even though Miami tried their hardest to fill those voids, giving Bam Adebayo more minutes and signing Derrick Jones Jr., the Heat again were just on pace to be a mediocre team. But optimism for the fan base increased significantly by the trading deadline, because after a mediocre season in Chicago and a failed reunion in Cleveland with LeBron, Dwayne Wade was traded back to Miami and the face of the franchise would finally return. Now, unfortunately, Wade was at an advanced age and his productivity really wouldn't change anything of significance for this team, and the Miami Heat would finish the season with a record of 44-38 as well as getting knocked out in the first round, but hey, it was still a great story. And actually, that storyline would carry over into the very next season because D-Wade would announce that the 2018-2019 season would be his last year in the league. Now, of course, this announcement was a bittersweet one for Heat fans, but it did serve as a perfect distraction for how terrible the Miami Heat were throughout the entire 2018-2019 year. But more importantly, what this allowed the Miami Heat to do was continue to build despite the fact that they had very little wiggle room with their cap space as well as no draft picks. Before the season began, Miami gave Derrick Jones Jr. a contract extension and signed undrafted prospect Duncan Robinson, a 6'7" sharpshooter out of Michigan who went underneath the radar for many scouts, largely because of his questionable productivity in college. And during the season, while everyone was celebrating D-Wade's career, the Heat continued to make some drastic changes to their roster. They parted ways with Tyler Johnson in his questionable contract. They gave Justice Winslow a contract extension as well as running a few experiments with him at the point guard position since Goran Dragic was sidelined for over half of the year. And Miami even experimented with Bam Adebayo, giving him more minutes and thrusting him into the starting lineup, which turned out to be a favorable decision since his impact on the defensive end of the floor was either identical or better than Hassan Whiteside due to his versatility. And on April 10th, the last game of the regular season for the Miami Heat, while D-Wade, Carmelo Anthony, and LeBron James were taking this iconic photo celebrating D-Wade's last game in the NBA, the front office in Miami continued to make additions to the roster and signed undrafted prospect Kendrick Nunn. And maybe that's the reason why this Miami Heat team took everyone by surprise. Because while everyone was applauding D-Wade and his amazing career, the front office continued to make moves to put them in great positioning to build something special with this team. And the 2019 offseason was just another great opportunity for this organization, because during the draft and with the 13th overall pick, Miami selected Tyler Hero, a 6'5" guard out of Kentucky who had the confidence to become one of the greatest shooters in the NBA. A month later, Miami participated in a 4-team trade where they not only acquired Jimmy Butler by parting ways with Josh Richardson to the Philadelphia 76ers, but also they unloaded Hassan Whiteside in his unmanageable contract to the Portland Trailblazers and in return received Myers Leonard. Now fast forward a few weeks later, and Kendrick Nunn, Duncan Robinson, and Tyler Hero proved during Summer League that they had the potential to have an immediate impact on this roster. And on top of the fact that Bam Adebayo was going to carry over some momentum from last year, as well as Goran Dragic being 100% healthy, and Miami was in great position to shock the NBA world. By the end of December, the Heat only had 9 games in their loss column, and by the end of January, it was undeniable that the Heat were going to be a very competitive team in the playoffs. But Miami still wasn't done, as the front office continues to build not only for now, but also in the future, as the Heat would participate in a 3-team trade where they would part ways with James Johnson, Justice Winslow, and Dion Waiters, and brought in both Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala. Now, this transaction not only brought in immediate help for this team, but also positioned Miami to make some major acquisitions in the upcoming free agency classes, since they now had cap relief after moving off of both James Johnson and Justice Winslow's contracts. The Heat would finish the season with a record of 44-29, good enough for the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, have a top 10 offense in the league, and the 11th ranked defense in the NBA. Jimmy Butler would lead the charge as he finished the season as a 3rd-team All-NBA performer. Bam Adebayo surprised many people with his productivity on the offensive end, but solidified himself as one of the best defenders in the league as he made 2nd-team All-Defense, while also finishing 2nd in the Most Improved Player of the Year race. And Kendrick Nunn, an undrafted prospect, amazed everyone in the NBA as he finished 2nd in the Rookie of the Year race. And in the playoffs, with the development of Tyler Hero and the experience of Goran Dragic, this Miami Heat team has continued to surprise everyone and has now found themselves in the NBA Finals after sweeping the Indiana Pacers in the first round, massively upsetting the first-seeded Milwaukee Bucks team in the second round, and finally taking out the Boston Celtics in the conference finals. Now, of course, having a team like Miami shock the NBA world and make the NBA Finals in and of itself is amazing, but how this team was able to piece together a title contending team, honestly, is just speechless. Just 3 to 4 years ago, the Miami Heat were in NBA hell. Too good to tank, not good enough to compete, bad contracts, and lackluster young pieces. But since then, the Miami Heat have been able to turn around their fortune with 3 undrafted prospects, 2 late lottery draft picks, and a few trades that not only brought in a top 15 player, but financially has given them the flexibility to make some major moves in these upcoming free agency classes. And just like that, we have another example of a team that has pieced together a title contending roster without having to rely on tanking or top 10 draft picks. So with all that being said, people, please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. I love making these type of videos because it is very interesting to see how a team that can be so stagnant for so long turn around their organization within a short window of time, especially if they didn't have to rely on any top 10 picks. Please let me know if you feel the same way about these type of videos in the comment section below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.